I'm muted? Okay. Okay.
Oh, hang on, I got that.
Gotta.
Get the dongle.
Hello? It's. Okay, technical difficulty there. Hold on 1 second. Okay, good morning. Welcome everyone, and welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space. And thank you for joining us for today's event, Disinformation, Creation, Dissemination, and Pedagogical Responses. Now, to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from ForSpace, and we are located on unceded Indigenous lands here in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. We'd like to extend our gratitude to the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, who are the caretakers for the lands and waters we are meeting on, for their teachings about the earth and our relations to it. Here at ForSpace, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge, co-create daily activities, examine research questions and projects that are happening across the university. We're running today's event as a live stream Zoom meeting, and we definitely welcome comments, questions via the chat. For those of you here with us in the space, if you'd like to participate, just raise your hand. We'll get a microphone over to you so that everyone can hear. And with that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to the Dean of Faculty of Arts and Science, Pascal Sicotte. Pascal, welcome.
Thank you, and good morning. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. I'm thrilled to welcome you to this major event today, event on tackling disinformation, organized by Bradley Nelson, Julie Corrigan, Andrea Hunter, whom I haven't seen this morning, Mark Sussman, can you raise your hand, Mark? David Secco, Vivek Venkatesh, and of course, ForSpace. Thank you very much to the team. So over the next 2 days, we'll explore this pressing issue from all angles, exploring its manifestations, impacts, and most importantly, mitigations, strategies for mitigation. Dans un monde où la désinformation et la mésinformation constituent une menace majeure, le monde universitaire représente une source essentielle de fiabilité et d'intégrité. As scholars, researchers, as educators, we are entrusted with producing knowledge and data that are robust and verified. Our commitment to evidence-based inquiry is the basis of our academic endeavor. But today, I want to emphasize the importance of interdisciplinary and scholarly dialogue in successfully combating disinformation. Our Faculty of Arts and Science is incredibly diverse, with 27 units covering a range of subjects from psychology to political science, math and stats, communication studies, First People studies, biology, and with our colleagues in fine arts, in engineering, in business. Basically, all these fields eventually get connected and get included in this scholarly dialogue that we want to promote. Disinformation is a societal problem that can and has had impact on our democratic institutions, on our health system, on our education system, on our relationship to nature and to our planet. The list is long, we could go on. Several elements related to disinformation cannot and will not be adequately addressed or solved with the tools of a single discipline. So it often will require a global approach that draws upon insights from a range of fields. In the struggles or the fight against disinformation and misinformation, our interdisciplinary approach enables us to dissect the underlying mechanisms, understand the societal implications, and devise alternative approaches, taking multiple points of view into account. Qu'il s'agisse par exemple d'étudier la psychologie de la propagande, d'examiner le rôle des algorithmes des médias sociaux dans l'amplification et la désinformation, ou d'explorer les dimensions éthiques de la guerre de l'information. Chaque discipline apporte donc une perspective globale et unique et contribue à une compréhension donc plus globale. I want to emphasize that we have a critical mission here in universities, which is, we know, and I want to remind us and perhaps refresh our thinking around this, which is to equip our learners with the skills that they need. And I had the list, and just speaking this morning over coffee with colleagues, I vastly saw we need to expand that list. I was going to say how to read, how to think critically, how to evaluate the validity of an argument, how to consult multiple serious sources. And then I thought, oh my God, we need to teach our people how to speak, how to relate to the world through our senses, through how we move, as some people were talking about dancing, to situate ourselves, to better understand our world, through our emotions as well. And all this can help us better understand disinformation, misinformation, and we have to do this all together across our fields. Donc, les universités sont plus que jamais des espaces essentiels, critiques, pour équiper nos étudiants et les membres de nos communautés face à la montée de cette désinformation et misinformation. Just like this two-day event, let's tackle this issue with a spirit of collaboration, open minds, curiosity, and hopefully positivity, as we were also discussing this morning. C'est grâce à notre expertise collective que nous pourrons continuer de disséminer et de faire dominer le savoir, la connaissance dans le discours public. Before I conclude, I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Brad Nelson, whose insights into the intersection of technology and disinformation are invaluable. Please welcome Brad to the podium.
Thank you, Pascal. It's so great to see so many people here this morning. Most of you I know. The ones I don't, I'll be happy to, looking forward to speaking with you in between the sessions. I don't want to take any more time away from our keynote speaker, but I do have some people and some organizations to thank before we get started. This event is happening thanks to a large grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada and smaller but very significant contributions from the Center for the Study of Learning and Performance, the Center for the Interdisciplinary Study of Society and Culture, the Vice President of Research and Graduate Studies, the Faculty of Arts and Science, the Department of Journalism, and my own Department of Classics, Modern Languages, and Linguistics. I also need to thank our team that has been helping organize this event so diligently, Franklin and Daniela and Manas and David. David, I hope you're watching this, and I hope you're feeling a little better today. And of course, Bertie and Douglas here in the fourth space. When we sat down, Mark and Andrea and I at first, and then eventually Vivek joined us last summer to talk about this event, we were imagining a one-day event, largely intellectual in nature, and it just started growing. The more we dialogued, the more we saw the need to bring in more players, pedagogical responses, for example, the artistic side and the dance side, and then the movie screening tonight as well, because this is something that we need to tackle collectively and from every angle that we can possibly approach it. Again, thank you all for being here, and now I'm going to introduce our speaker this morning, Victoria Rubin. Vicki is a professor in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at the University of Western Ontario, where she teaches graduate courses in the Library and Information Science graduate programs. As a researcher, she specializes in information retrieval and natural language processing techniques that enable analyses of text to identify, extract, and organize structured knowledge. In her lab, the acronym spells out LiT.RL, she and her students study complex human information behaviors that are at least partly expressed through language such as deception, uncertainty, credibility, and emotions. Her current focus is identifying Misleading News with Text Analytics. She has published widely on the use of AI to detect and prevent disinformation, including her recent book, Misinformation and Disinformation, Detecting Fakes with the Eye and AI, a book that I highly recommend. I especially like the sort of three-pronged approach of AI detection, regulation, and legal control of AI, and of course, user education, which is primarily what we're looking at today. Dr. Rubin's research is unique in its identification of textual clues to disinformation in digital media, and her inclusion in this event is vital. Victoria, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Great thanks to everyone who is involved in organizing this two-day conference. I really appreciate being in this place. Bonjour tout le monde. This talk is geared towards the general audience. If we could start the slides, please, that would be lovely. Talking about this three-pronged approach, I will be arguing throughout this talk that we need to be looking at three potential solutions: automation, education, and regulation. And there is also a hidden piece of the human mind that goes quite a bit into the creation of AI technologies that we will be talking about. This is the formal introduction. The less formal one is good morning and thank you for being here as a live audience. This talk is largely about lying. And if I may ask your permission to involve you in a little experiment in a few slides, how good is your eye for spotting a lie? Would you agree to do that? Okay, good, excellent. We'll do some of that. Before we start with that, let me backtrack a little bit. So I'm out of London, Ontario, city of about 500,000. Oops, there is the mic that's not mine. I'm just gonna move it out of the way if that's okay with the forced space. In the Great Lakes area, right? Everybody knows it, I hope. The institution is quite old. It's about 150 years old. University of Western Ontario. We go lovingly by Western lately. It has an enrollment of about 43,000 students, similar to Concordia enrollment, if I'm not mistaken. We do get snow, just like you guys. And our campus is a mix of the old and a lot of the futuristic newer buildings, for those of you who've been. I come from the Faculty of Information Media Studies. We've recently been moved into that building that is looking a lot different from the rest of the campus feel. And the faculty has been around for over 55 years by now. We have 8 graduate programs, 3 of them are doctoral ones. So in my lab, I supervise 5 to 6 doctoral students, and we share expertise in linguistics, computer science, psychology, media studies, and yes, we run out of library information science. The lab is called Language Information Technology Research Lab. The team changes from year to year, so these are the names you will see in our publications. What do we aim to do in our lab? We try to improve access to information, and we do that by developing software programs, developing language models that allow the algorithms to achieve human-like understanding of texts. And in this sense, I don't mean texts such as we send through our phones, I actually rather mean textual data. So the artifact of language, artifact of human communication. So we also deal with a lot of human behavior. As Brad rightfully noticed, a lot of human behavior has that footprint in our communication, and it's expressed through language. This is where natural language processing comes in. And for those of you who are not familiar with what it is, it's a branch of AI. It is, in simple words, the use of computers to analyze text. There are a lot more formal communications that you can put out, including algorithmic treatment of textual data. So with NLP, my doctoral students and I are able to find patterns in texts, in textual data. And then we use these patterns to create models. We enhance them with machine learning, another technique, statistical technique from AI, and it allows us to do predictions. You know, weathermen, they predict rain or sun. We do a similar binary classification. We could predict, for instance, if this text is happy or sad. We can predict if a person is speaking with a lot of confidence, or are they hedging their speech like academics tend to do, right? So when you hear about AI nowadays, a lot of the time it's preceded by the term generative. AI, roughly speaking, can be divided into two big attempts. One of them is to generate text. And the other one is actually less known nowadays in the media. It's understanding. So our work is in understanding. And what does it mean to understand with algorithms? It's basically to mimic understanding, right? So we're talking about analysis of texts. We're not talking about the generation. Some other examples of analytical NLP would be spam filters, or it would be the lesser known part of machine translation. Before you can translate it into another language and generate it with AI, meaning to synthesize which word goes after the other, you have to understand what does each word in the sentence actually mean. So we are dealing with understanding. And the output of that is detection. So the kind of NLP AI-based techniques we're using are about our ability to automatically recognize whether a text, for instance, is a clickbait or not. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit more and tell you where this research started about 10 to, well, 14 years ago. It was the time when the first early bells were ringing. We were hearing a lot about people trying to manipulate information online, just starting to hear. Not everybody was paying attention yet. And I was interested in looking in the fields that have studied lying. Why do people lie? How do they lie? What do they say? What do they lie about? How serious are these lies? How do people believe they can tell a lie? So it's all about the human eye, the human perception of what's happening. It led to a research agenda. Of course, we were doing that in an effort to inform our algorithmic treatment of texts, because where does the smarts come from? The knowledge comes from the human behavior, from understanding what lying is all about. It led to a research agenda when we were able to put together proof of concept that we were able to identify certain kinds of lies, certain kinds of what we called at the time fakes. So notice that it was 2015. The term fake news was not yet popularized. It has largely fallen out of favor in the deception detection research community because it's been weaponized and politicized too much. So the term misinformation kind of appeared around 2019, and that's when my lab and I formalized the conceptual model of what might be causing what's happening online, what are the potential causal factors, and we looked into interventions. So the majority of my talk is going to be about these three parts: the human eye, the automation, and the whys, and how to stop it. And it's all based on about 250 some pages of research that you will see in the book. And if you are a student or researcher who is interested in the details of the implementation or the psychological research, I strongly encourage you to actually go to the book and look up the conference and journal papers, because that's where you will find the detail as opposed to just kind of a general teaser that I'm providing to you with a general overview to the public. With these three parts, I argue, so we'll start from the key phenomena in terms of deception. I also argue for the three interventions that are in these stop sign symbolisms. I argue for automation, I argue for education, and this is what this conference is going to be good at. And I hope you will be able to answer some of the questions that we haven't quite gotten to. We have a lot of concerns at this point. And the third part, or the fifth in the talk, is going to be a little bit about regulation. So let's start from deception. There is a field of interpersonal psychology and communication that has reached its meta-analysis stage. It's been around for 50 to 75 years, depending on where you go back to. And in that field, there's been a lot of attempts in defining what do people mean when they say lying, and distinguishing various kinds of lies and falsifications and fibs and serious ones. But the consensus is that when we talk about deception, deception is a communicative act. Lucky for us, I'm in the media studies sort of area. So communicative act, it's a message that's sent from one person to another or from one to many. And what's important that it's an intentional or deliberate act in which one person, the liar, is trying to create a false impression or a false belief or a conclusion in the perceiver's mind. So it takes at least two to tango, and that's often underestimated. And that's where the education part comes in. How does your eye see whether it agrees to trust the message of the liar or not? Is it preconditioned to do that? Or is it just tuned out and stressed and time pressed? So, oops, my slides are heading ahead of me. Jacqueline, help. Oh, good, I'm good, okay. So notice again that in this definition, the liar's intention is important, and so is the awareness. And it excludes self-deception, and it excludes honest errors. How many of you could tell me today, now, that you've never told a lie in your life? Raise your hand. Look around. So lying is exceptionally widespread. If we include various white lies and pro-social, kind of good intentional lies, like a surprise party or Christmas gifts where they come from, or tooth fairies, people lie more frequently than they care to admit. So lying is pervasive. It's pervasive, and it also serves a particular function of social lubricant in our society. So an opinion poll conducted by Miller and Stiff in '93 suggested that lying is more widespread in everyday life than it has ever been previously assumed. And only 12%, nobody here, of course, but 12% of the respondents claimed that they never told a lie. At the same time, 24% said that they lied at least once during the previous day. Imagine that. So how does interpersonal psychology and communication study this kind of phenomena? They usually ask groups of people or individual participants to come in and produce a lie, and it's called an elicitation task. And then they ask another group of people to come in and tell which one is a lie, which one is the truth. So this is where we're getting to the part where I'm going to ask you to help me out a little bit. I'm going to ask you to read the screen in a minute. So I'm going to show you an example in which one participant in this case produced two statements. It's going to be on a topic of abortion. Why not go for the most controversial one, of course? So this is an example from Rada Mihalcea out of University of Michigan, and Carla Straparava out of Italy, a well-known AI, natural language processing lab. They asked people to come in and imagine that they were giving a speech and write a short statement. One is going to be pro-life, the other one's going to be pro-choice. I'm going to read it with you. I'm going to try to be as neutral as possible with my tone. And I'm going to ask you to tell me if A is a lie and vote, to tell me if B is a lie and vote. And we'll see how good the audience is here in live. Okay? So this is a little game, no stress, no pressure. So let's start from the first one. I believe abortion is not an option. Once a lie has been conceived, it's precious. No one has the right to decide to end it. Life begins at conception, because without conception, there is no life. So that's one, it's A, and there's B. A woman has free will and free choice over what goes on in her body. If the child has not been born, it's under her control. Often the circumstances an unwanted child is born into are worse than death. The mother has the responsibility to choose the best course for her child. So the important part here, I'm not asking you for your opinion. I'm not asking you to agree with one or the other. I'm asking you to detach your eye and tell me which one feels like the person who is telling this is the lie. Where is the person actually prevaricating? So I'm going to ask you to raise your hands if you think A is a lie. I'm gonna give you a minute and I'm gonna do a count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I take it we have about 20 people in the audience. 9.5, or maybe 8, 9. Okay, so obviously you can abstain or you can tell me if B is a lie. Could you raise your hands if you think B is a lie? Let's count. You can't vote twice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 9 to 10. Do you think I'm surprised? Are you surprised that half of you think 1 is the lie? The other ones think, well, that's very indicative of our human abilities, of our eyes' ability collectively to tell whether something is a lie or not. We'll come back to that in a second. Let's have, first of all, do you want to reveal which one is the lie or which one is not? Do you care? No, let's just go. Okay. All right. So here is the one in black is a deceptive text. The one we're hoping to identify automatically with AI. And I'm asking you to pay attention to little detail, not just what is said, but how it's being said. So what we're seeing on the right is we're seeing more references to other, her child, as opposed to on the left, we're seeing I, and we're seeing a word of insight, I believe. We're also seeing slightly longer text, and we're also seeing so-called generalized terms, such as an unwanted child and a woman. It's subtle. It's not something you can control very well, as we all know with the pronouns. Pronouns just slip out. But that's something that you can pick up on, and that's something that natural language processing, NLP techniques, can actually identify over a large amount of texts. So it turns out that after the extensive studies on how people tell lies, not only what they say, you can notice patterns. So truth tellers compared to deceivers tell more self-references, and they use more detailed answers on average. This is not a Pinocchio nose, this is not the golden rule, but on average. On average, deceivers use more indirect statements, they show more negative emotions, and they're also talking about sense-based words as opposed to the insight, such as believing or thinking. So this is hopeful, but the problem is that it is statistical averages. And the number of clues is so large that for one human being to keep track of it, of these subtleties, is very difficult. That's where we employ computers. So on the eye sort of verdict, how good is the human eye at lie detection? Or is there a crystal ball to tell us that? What we know from social psychology and communication studies that human ability to detect deception is only slightly better than chance. So typical accuracy rates are in 55 to 58% range, with a mean of 54 in over 1,000 people's participations, similar to what we just did, with hundreds or so experiments in social psychology and communication studies. So I'm quite confident I'm going to put out this crystal ball does not exist. At the same time, you would say, well, maybe we can train somebody. They've tried that. So how about professional lie catchers, lie detectors? How about people that are at the borders? Don't they know what they're doing? They do. They have a lot more confidence than they show. But if they are trained to look for these clues, the studies say that they improve only up to about 64% accuracy. So accuracy meaning 5 out of 10 or 6.5 out of 10 are being identified correctly when given two options, right? On average, having 50-50 is already a chance that we would expect when we're given two choices. So the performance, the human performance, is not really impressive, considering that a 50% accuracy is expected by chance alone. So we're back to the idea of automated methods that could help us humans keep track of some of these clues. And I'll come back to that. First of all, I want to talk a little bit more how deception actually translates into disinformation in online environments. Why am I even talking about lying? Well, I'm talking about lying because lying has a lot of financial motives, has a lot of political motives, and sometimes has personal gain. That backtracks back to political motives and financial motives. And that's what's happening online quite a bit. I hope you expected some definitions. That's what's coming next. So we agreed so far that deception is the message fostered to create a false belief in the conclusion. And in 2012, a researcher who is now at Stanford, Jeff Hancock, called it digital deception. That's the term that didn't really stick too much, but the term mis and disinformation has been replacing the idea of deception of various kinds occurring online. And the consensus in the community is that there are two broad categories, mis and dis, and the distinction is in intention. So if it's an intentional, where a person knows there's a difference between what they're saying and what they're producing, that's called disinformation. And when it happens unintentionally, meaning some errors have happened and you perpetuated a lie without being aware of that, that's called misinformation. I'm sure as of 2016, since the first US presidential election, everyone has had acute awareness of the problematic types of information. They were called fakes at the time, and they are competing for space with legitimate news articles, and they can look shockingly like the real thing. And as of pandemic, the term infodemic came into our lexicon, stayed there for a little bit and died out together with the pandemic. So the World Health Organization, jointly with fellow United Nations organizations like UNICEF and UNESCO, sounded the alarm, and they were warning the public of this overabundance of online and offline information, deliberate attempts to disseminate wrong information, undermining the government responses worldwide to what's happening. So that's kind of the link between deceiving, lying, and mis and disinformation. And it is helpful to understand the intentions, but it's really hard in terms of knowing what people's intentions are. Because in order to understand them, we actually have to ask them for it. And once we ask them for the intentions, do we know if they're telling the truth or not? It's really hard to establish. Sometimes it takes 12 jurors, even in legal cases, and not even all of them agree on it, right? So intentions are hard to establish. So for research purposes, especially for the purpose of automation, we needed to look for various kinds of fakes that are low-lying kind of fruit that we can try to pick up. So I'm gonna show you a few examples. We're gonna talk about legitimate news versus false news. And I wanted to narrow down the context. So imagine a context that matter. Imagine disasters receiving false coverage, such as natural fires or floods or earthquakes. If we don't inform the public truthfully, the chaos will follow. And that's when the early alarms were happening on Twitter. An example from 2012 was a Columbia chemical plant in Louisiana that was falsely reported to have an explosion. It created a mass exodus of near inhabitants. Turned out it was nothing. Turned out it was a hoax. So here are some early examples of a similar kind. This one is coming back to the idea of false claims, outright falsifications for the good of someone's, I don't know if it's LOL, all for laughs, or for any financial purpose. So here is one. World News Daily Report in 2015 was alerting Florida population about Ebola-ridden rat-infested ship heading their way. I don't know if you remember that. So Craig Silverman, the editor and journalist on BuzzFeed, was one of the first experts to document the spread of disinformation online at the time. And the interesting part is that was the first time when fictitious World News Daily Report article contained fabricated photos, it had made up mathematical measurements, and for the good measure, it had imaginary quotes from invented officials. So all these dubious details gave a story an air of authenticity, and many readers took to social media to spread the news about this ghost ship impending arrival. So Emergent is the organization that was headed by Craig Silverman at the time, and the Snopes is another one of the fact-checking organizations that you may be familiar with. And they have obviously debunked and verified the suspicious report, especially knowing that it comes out of the World News Daily Report that does not represent any of the news organizations as far as they were aware. At that time, researchers were warning of potential threats to the citizens' very ability to form evidence-based decisions on the matters of societal importance, such as public health is one of them, or climate change, or national security for that matter. So that's one distinct type. Somebody is putting out information that is a false claim and is the closest one to outright lying and falsification. Here's another one. It's a little bit more subtle, a slightly different flavor. It's a hoax. It's a social criticism. It's poking fun at some social ailment. So satirical fakes, a satire. Many of you are in literature, you know what its aim is. It's a rhetorical strategy in any medium, and it seeks to wittily provoke an emotional and intellectual reaction in an audience on a matter of public significance. Satire must also serve a purpose beyond simple spectacle. It must aspire to cure folly, as they say in rhetoric, and to punish the evil. That's a quote from 1972. So an example of that, in the midst of the pandemic in 2021, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, suggests that we all wear foil masks. I think that was sort of following the bleach incident and some other cures that were put out. Well, wait a second. What is the foil mask going to do? So this is the kind of content that is meant to be satirical, that's meant to be understood by the people who are in the know, yet it's reshared, taken out of context, and it's misattributed or misread, and obviously it becomes a problem. So the Snopes got on that, obviously, and they revealed that that was a satirical piece. The problematic part is that a lot of the fake news producers were claiming to be a satire when they were lacking the element of humor or that social purpose that was served towards highlighting some problem in the society. So that's the second kind. And the third kind, so I just want to point out that when it's taken at face value, it's still misleading to some people. And the third kind that we were after in terms of very concrete types of misleading information is the clickbait headlines. So that's the ones that tease the reader with the content, and you kind of can't help but be compelled because you're curious. You know, this is how parents can relieve stress throughout the day. Aren't we all stressed? Aren't we all parenting? Or 17 things you've probably never seen before. Really? There might be something else I haven't seen, I need to know, right? So there is an attraction of attention, and it encourages you to click, and it's an appeal to emotions, and it triggers your curiosity. It's engineered. Somebody has written it, and they know the psychology of how we respond to this messaging. And it could be like listicles, like 17 things to do, or it could be something as, you know, cute animals and silly beards for the spring. These kind of things are produced by clickbait sites. They're called content generation farms. Good example actually runs out of Dipley. It hires a fair amount of our journalist students undercover. So it's called Dipley. And the other one is Upworthy. I don't know if you've heard of many other ones. BuzzFeed used to be less socially critical and more clickbaity in the beginning of its existence as well. So the content the links lead to typically does not fulfill the promise. Okay, so that's the third kind. Here's another problem, alarming health news in 2018. This time, Fresno, California man turned up in a local emergency room carrying a 5-foot-long tapeworm he pulled out of his intestines. So, how do you feel about that one? Satire? What if I were to tell you that it was run by the US National Public Radio? What if I were to tell you that the reporters of NPR actually called the city hall, the emergency room, contacted the person, and verified the story? So there is some value to fact-checking, but my point here is life is stranger sometimes than you expect, right? And stranger than fiction, isn't that what they say? So this is an example of a truthful report from a reliable source with credible statements that actually match the author's knowledge and belief. And what's different in this is going to be what we saw in the text A as opposed to what we saw in text B. So how people produce this is going to be written differently, right? In other words. So here's where the automation part comes in. Now that we've talked about these 3 different kinds of fakes or types of deception, outright falsehoods, satire, and clickbait, let's see if we can get to them automatically, understanding how humans do it and implementing it through the automated methods of natural language processing. Turns out AI-based methods, automated ability to detect deception, has been proven feasible as of 2004. A team of Lina Zhu out of University of Maryland were the pioneers, where they compiled, clustered, and automatically identified those linguistic features that we just talked about. To give you an example of what they are, there's actually 27 of them, not just 2 or 3 that we talked about, but it does include those generalizing terms. And they have clear definitions of what it is, and they have linguistic analysts looking for these kind of expressions, and then they kind of bootstrap from the seed data and look for more patterns in much larger data. So generalizing terms referring to more general terms such as all fruit as opposed to oranges. If somebody asks you what you had for breakfast, and you probably had bacon and eggs, right? You were not really saying the truth. Or self-references, and some of these features are a lot more complex. So you can see that they're clustered in 9 different kind of concepts. So one of them is expressivity, that is cleverly expressed, but honestly it's just counting total number of adjectives and adverbs divided by nouns and verbs. So that's what NLP does. We actually count, we calculate language, believe it or not, it is possible. So that was one of the early works. The same study that I showed you before out of Michigan and Italy were able to replicate similar sort of accuracy rates of about 70%. They have pointed out that these are objective verbal cues. That's not the cues that you believe, not the grandma's stories about how to tell a lie. And they relied on a human practice in law enforcement with the psycholinguistic analytical resource that's called LIT, or Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count. So when credibility assessment or lie detector officers sit down with a report, they would circle certain words and they would literally count them by hand. How many of these words happen in this statement? And then they're able to see if the person is likely to lie or person is likely to tell the truth. So here is an example of some categories that were counted with NLP and created so-called dominance score, times words occur in each group. So for deceptive texts, notice actually in both of these situations, 3 of the top 5 dominant classes are related to humans. We're back here to pronouns, mentions of humans for the deception, and then to pronouns I and self for the truthful texts. Not to say that every time I say I believe, that means I will be telling the truth, but on average, that kind of averages out over a large amount of text. So we took the lead from this early work, and we wanted to see if we can apply it to 3 distinct varieties of fakes. And we basically followed what's called a pipeline, a process where we collect the data, we input known features, we create a model, a machine learning model, and then it gives us a prediction. Is the new unseen statement more likely to be the truthful one, or is it more likely to be the deceptive one? And data here, there's a lot said about data and the AI use. We always ask permission, and we take some part of the data to be the known ground truth, and we contrast it to deceptive stories, and the more data is the better. The cleaner data is paramount, labeled data is key, and if it doesn't exist, it has to be created. So that's what we did in the beginning. We talked to the NPR and we said, well, you have a lovely, lovely show. Wait, don't tell me, bluff the listener. And mind you, this is pre-Trump election, it's 2012. So we asked them for data. We randomly split it into 60 stories that were written by professional journalists to bluff the listener. They were not true, versus the ones that actually were true, but they were kind of unbelievable. So it had a nuance of that unbelievability. Our accuracy rates when we ran the system were not as good. So they stayed in about 63%. And we started thinking, okay, there must be something about humor. So our second challenge was to identify humor and be more careful about how we collected data. Again, the data here is not in billions and billions of gigabytes. It's just very carefully manicured. We did a 2x2 design where we had 2 legitimate and 2 satirical outlets. Beaverton served as the counterpart of The Onion. We collected across 12 topics and 4 big domains: civics, science, business, and soft news. And we basically said, we're going to look for the original article that may have been targeted by the satirist to point out the ailment in the society. And we expanded it to some other contexts of still English speaking. This is one of our most popular data sets from 2016. People want to see it because it's easy to train on very clearly manicured data. We also found features. So what did we go for? We made linguistic observations. We were able to nail down and kind of adopt and adapt some of the known methodological advances about absurdity, about humor, satire detection, and the combination of these features. We tested one of them at a time, compared to the baseline. I'll show you the results in a second, but here's an example of a satirical piece. Well, this is actually the target news. So New York Times puts out an article of a new species in the human lineage that's being found, and they interview Dr. Berger, and you can see the short statement that is leading the article, and then you can see the Onion going at it, going to town. So first, you notice the sentence complexity. You notice the statement is huge. It has a lot of punctuation in it. It is really odd that you can pick up on the humor and absurdity of the statement by sheer length and complexity of it, but it seems to account for a lot of the expression. That's what satirists go after. So we take different, so right here, I don't know if I have a, yeah, I have a. So the baseline is one of the earlier attempts without any of the features. We start adding one after the other. How is absurdity expressed? How's humor? And we find the best performing combination of these features, which gives us about 9 out of 10 correct. And there's computer science details in terms of precision and recall. But on average, I'm quite confident if we encounter 10 new pieces of news, we'll be able to tell 8 out of 10, or maybe even 9 out of 10 correctly. So that was our second challenge. And the third challenge was the clickbait detection. We used similar methods. Again, bigger data set this time because headlines are shorter. We don't need to manicure as much the body of the text. We used even more features this time, and we achieved 94% accuracy. Lovely. As a matter of fact, 73% of that was accounted by the pronoun frequency. And here's an example from Reddit where you can see they're referring to my and her and he and their. You have no idea what they're talking about or who they're talking about, but you can't help but wonder, what is it all about? So, and that's the main mechanism of clickbait, is curiosity. So for now, I have told you that we have 3 different concepts of proof on 3 varieties of deception types. Outright false news, the trickiest one of all. It achieves 63 with us, or 74 with other researchers, other labs. Satires, 87, and it's around the average for many of the techniques from early to late 2010s. And then clickbait is 94% accuracy. We combined it all into, oh, sorry, this is my slide that's meant, oops, back. That's meant to tell you, if you remember our joint performance here in the group, it's very indicative of the 54% mean average. So there is a slight gain over human ability, so it makes sense to use some of these techniques. And many of you are using spam filters in your email, no matter how annoying. And they're probably performing at 60-some% accuracy. And then you clean the rest of it all day. You take out the ones that and fish out the ones that are true. So 54% accuracy is not ideal, and we need some human assistance. So we put out this research through the scientific journals and conferences, and we also created an open access system through GitHub. This is the website that computer scientists generally share their code with. We made it public, we made it as transparent as possible. The side effect of it, as soon as we tell them, whoever they are, they know how we get them, and they get better. So we're kind of in the situation of AI race. The detectors detect, and the synthesizers synthesize, right? But yet this research is there for anybody to pick up and make modifications and sort of improve it. It was also available to a human being to just install an exe. Right now it's being worked on by Dr. Chris Brogley, one of my graduates. He's at LiT.RL. He's improving the look of the interface, and it will be put out as an update quite soon. So what does it look like? I'm going to show you what a detector looks like. That's the layout of that news verification browser. It's a suite of 3 detectors. Notice there is a clickbait tab on the bottom right, and then the other 2, you can go through tabs, satire, and the falsifications, which we labeled as prototype due to its accuracy issues. And we're looking at the situation where we're using traffic light analogy with the intermediate yellow-orange. The left-hand side, our headlines are color-coded, and that's a website of the BBC's front page, main headline, deemed to be phrased in a traditional headline style. They also called headlinees. So thus they're green. And you can also see the top right, we have details by each individual statement, and we have columns of clickbait or not clickbait. So food and medicine run low in Gaza, even as of October 2023, was still a sort of traditional way to report the news, the headlinees. And the bottom right are the bars that represent the overall clickbaitiness of the website. So it tells you that we have analyzed 108 links from the BBC, and we deem that website to be about 40% clickbaity, so moderately clickbaiting. Let's compare that to CNN. It's about the same average of 37% moderate clickbaitiness. In yellow, you see a milder clickbait. 3 adjectives are used: painful, polarizing, and complicated. Something is quite unusual for news to be reporting with emphasizes or language. In orange, you see uses of superlatives. Trump's biggest challenge is to shut up, still is. So the biggest is one of those superlative degrees, and it still triggers your curiosity. What was it about? What exactly did he say now? So the more heavily clickbaity headlines are in red, more linguistic features were found in those headlines, and a perfect storm for home buyers. You might be worried of what it is that you should be concerned about if you're in the market. So that's CNN. NPR, the sort of legacy US news. How does it compare? Still 31% clickbaitiness. On October 19, 2023, 122 headlines were analyzed on the front page. And a good example of the clickbait headline here is, here's what Biden did or didn't do. We have no idea what it is. It's inviting you to go in. But notice the bars on the right? So 70 out of 122 were traditional headlines. We're looking at CBC right now. If you are a listener of CBC, there may be a good reason for why it appeals to you. If you notice, the number of clickbaits is quite low. As a matter of fact, it's only 13% clickbaity. And watch the bars now. So this is one of those clickbait farms, and it's 55%, it's growing. And if you go to BuzzFeed, notice the bar again, it's 85% clickbaity. So you would think most people know when they see a clickbait, yet if it's disattached from its original source and the same format appears, we'll be able to pick it up and alert a human eye to the possibility of misleading or inaccurate information. I also like to look at the campus news. I don't know if any of you are familiar with The Link. Is that a popular student newspaper here? So I just ran theirs, and they are, the students did really well. They are, they can be compared to CBC, and they are faring fairly well. Then not as prolific, obviously only 48 headlines, but surprisingly conservative, perhaps trying to establish their credibility as reporters. So these kind of detectors are useful, and I talk about some other kinds in the book, including native ads, including rumor detection, and there are some early attempts at fully automated fact-checking websites, which I'm not that well familiar with, and I don't think it's in principle possible. My main argument, there has to be a human component. So we're on to this situation next in terms of why is this all happening? Why are we seeing instances of deception in various guises online? I started thinking in 2019, what could be an explanation? And I stumbled across an epidemiological model from plant pathology. It's called the disease triangle, formulated in the 60s by George McNew, a scientist out of Boyce-Thompson Institute of Plant Research. And it's a model that most doctors agree with. Pathogen is the disease agent. It could be the virus, the bacteria, or other microorganisms. And the host are the plants. I'm going to bring up the idea of these virulent pathogens, very much like we see it online with deception. The idea of the environments that are responsible for the spread of the pathogen, and then the idea of the compromised host. And then we can kind of map it back to the information overloaded news readers, information seekers that simply have no time to fact check or even give a second thought to any particular news piece. So the idea is simple. These various fakes keep coming at us, and susceptible humans, the hosts, that perhaps lack some awareness or education, are compromised, or they're simply strapped for time, and the conducive environments are the ones that are responsible for spreading it. And what can we do? We kind of have to disrupt the spread of the disinformation by attacking one of these three, or making sure that these factors don't interact. I don't think I need to talk too much more about the incessant bombardment of information that ignites the spread. Agents of disinformation are at work, and it's widely recognized that it's financial gain primarily, as well as political and personal. In terms of conducive environments, it's also no news to anybody here in the room that the way we read news, the way we get news has changed over the past several years. By 2022, a survey by the Pew Research Center reports that about half of the US adults say they get news on social media, and I believe Canadian public is about similar sort of rate of use of smartphones, specifically in terms of platforms. And it's also no news that the ad spending is growing from year to year, and my slides are not moving. Jacqueline? Oh, here we go. Here's my slide. So the ad spending in digital advertising was about $60 billion in 2016. It grew steeply over the past 7 years, at least fourfold. And the US digital ad spending alone is projected to reach about 280 by the end of 2024. And then we come to the part in which you'd be able to contribute quite a bit, is the education part. So when we're talking about the susceptible hosts, the way we read has changed quite a bit. Very few news readers can spare the time and energy to fact check nowadays. The way that the environment of news production has been interrupted in the past 20 years is impacted the way we get news. And we now know that we're fairly ineffective at recognizing lies for various reasons. One of them is the inherent truth bias. So people tend to not give it a second thought, basically. Information we receive, we think true is reliable, and then the society has to work to change that perception. We also know that some people seem to exhibit general gullibility. So people are receptive to the ideas of others, especially if they don't understand it. That's called the BS factor. It's wonderful work by Gordon Pennycook. So we also find out about tendencies in news reading practices. People simply don't read much beyond headlines nowadays, and we just saw what happens with headlines. So evidence of superficial reading. And another pitfall that you hear probably more about is confirmation bias. So many people simply only want to see what they already believe. There was a work in 2009 by Lamar, Lunderville, and Beam, and they found that conservative viewers of the news satire program, the Colbert Report, tend to believe the comedian's statements as sincere, while the liberal viewers tend to recognize the satirical elements. So it's a mix of interesting situations. And on top of it all, people often lack that overall literacy skill required to interpret news critically, and they might lack the context, whether it's historical, cultural, local, and so forth. So what do we do about it? There are, like just in epidemiology, the disease spreads only if all these three things occur simultaneously. And if one or more of these factors is not present, there is a disruption, as we have learned with the pandemic. If you don't go anywhere, you are no longer a host. If the environment is clean, if it's not conducive, if you're outdoors, you can't have the spread of disinformation. So we have to work at it at three angles. We can keep working at the detection and revealing and alerting from the AI point of view, keeping in mind that AI is always being informed by the human eye anyway. We can keep working on the human mind, not as much the eye for spotting, but actually preparing the mind. We can keep working at educating, creating awareness, showing people the new kinds of things, the new kinds of tricks that the dark creative minds are creating for us. So inoculating, pre-bunking. By the way, have you heard that people send hate messages through e-transfer and a little message on the bottom? So that's the newest one. That hasn't happened till about a month ago. I only heard about it a couple of weeks. There's a new way. So creating an awareness, creating, somebody sends you $1 and it's spewing out hate message. You don't necessarily want to receive that. So pre-bunking is putting out an idea in the public to be aware. We all know about the Nigerian princess. We know not to go for that in spam. Similar has to happen here in terms of how we interact with news online. And the last part is about regulation, basically cleaning up the environment. How am I doing on time? Do I have a couple more minutes?
We'll have less time for questions.
I will just then do it very schematically. So the parts that I wanted to kind of ask your input on is the education. I have some ideas, but I'm interested in yours, and I'm here to listen to what you have to say. And regulation is honestly away from my work, even though I have studied it. So in terms of education, I believe that the onus is on educational institutions and on us as educators to reach out to our country's population with consistent, accurate messaging and reliable expert sources, which means for us researchers stepping up these efforts. That's why I'm here in Montreal talking to you in some sense. And the final decision in that kind of education is obviously in the mind of the individuals. Going back to my idea of the Communication Act in the deception, any kind of communication is the tango of two. One has to trust what the person is saying or distrust what the person is saying. So education is a huge component. Educational system for any democratic society should aim to teach citizens from a young age a rational way of thinking, which can benefit society as a whole and each individual within it. At each level, there are ways to explain how to use a critical mindset when faced with new information online, whatever format, whatever form of that or platform it appears in. There have been a few large-scale studies, trials, and several initiatives that include specific short-term campaigns, so educational campaigns, or more permanent embedding of various literacies, digital literacy, media literacy, news literacy, information literacy, you name it. That embedding into educational curriculum for early grade schools through graduate studies. I think Scandinavia is leading there. So taking a look at targeted literacy classes, self-directed learning resources and their effectiveness, and the critical mindset throughout the public education creates more awareness, discernment, and less rush. A lot of the time, just stop and think is one of the critical advices in here. I have quite a bit of information in the book about it on different educational interventions. I'll flash a few suggestions. As of 2016, librarians and journalists from PolitiFact joined in these kind of simple pamphlets. Harvard University was educating their students, and many others have followed. American Library Magazine talked to the teachers. At Western, we continue putting out digital walls of information with cautionary tales and conducting public events, such as poster sessions. Librarians, including Ontario Library Association, actually has a conference in June that you're welcome to attend. It's free for everyone. Learning from librarians who've been vetting information for hundreds of years is important because they've managed to preserve trust in the general public. So the call to you in this conference for me is what works in your experience and what ought to be done. And the other piece that should not be overlooked is the regulation. Regulation is subject of public debate around trade-offs and stumbling blocks of countermeasures. Legal experts, government officials, academics, policymakers, and general public worldwide still debate these trade-offs. There seem to be 4 types of regulations by their target, either the social media platform, offenders, governments, or the civil society. And they have various types of approaches, from content takedowns to regulation of advertising and criminalizing the content and kind of punishing the offenders, to the monitoring and reporting on the citizens' public discourse as opposed to commercial. And again, the general sense that I'm getting is that the crude measures of controlling public discourse are being discouraged, and people are coming back to you, educators, and they're advocating on public education, figuring out pro-social means of bolstering facts, educators going out to public and amplifying their messages and reestablishing the trust in the basic institutions of a democratic society. I have created my own listicle of 10 from sort of very concrete to more aspirational, from countermeasures of digital literacies, rethinking rational thinking in public education, to creating authoritative resources and reimagining online experiences. And you're welcome to take a look at it in the book. Again, what I've argued today is that we need to automate, we need to educate, and it's up to you to look into how the human mind needs to be educated further, and we need to regulate. And with that, I'm going to put out the shameless self-promotion department slide and also give you links for further information if you'd like to either take a look at the live demo of the news verification browser when it runs on a news website, or if you wanted to get the code and make modifications, or if you wanted to take a look at the individual chapters in the book that have, chapters on philosophies of truth, psychology of lying, credibility assessment, among the ones I haven't talked about at all. Sorry for taking so much time.
Do we have a minute for a couple questions? We're running a little bit late, but those who are joining on Zoom, if you want to pop a question into the chat, we can read that out also.
Sure. So my question, I work in science education, among some other things. And a while ago, actually, here at the CSLP, we had a speaker on science education who pointed out, well, can we really expect science education to accomplish the kinds of goals that you talk about in your presentation? And he suggested that the answer was no. And his reasoning for that was, well, if you look at people who hold climate denialist beliefs in the United States, the people who have the most well-articulated and deeply held climate denialist beliefs are in fact wealthy Republicans who are well-educated, right? I mean, education has not served to inoculate these wealthy Republicans from having climate denialist beliefs. The problem is that they're too closely associated with the Republican Party and its particular belief set, right? So I mean, if education didn't work for that very large cross-section of Americans, why should we expect it to kind of be this universal panacea, I guess?
That's an excellent question. You expect me to answer that. So I explicitly had a three-pronged approach. I believe that the messaging is insufficient in education. It has to continue being put out, regardless of those extreme sides that are holding on to their beliefs and are sort of prey to confirmation bias in a sense. So I advocate not just to educate, but also start from grassroots and conversations in the society to start pointing out that the general conduit of that information is already faulty. The mechanism is clogged up. So if we keep at the three-pronged approach at once, persistently doing it, there should be a hope for shifting. The education alone only works for the final kind of decision to trust or not, and there are many other factors, as you rightfully point out, including financial, political, or any kind of face-saving or peer pressure or any other things that may not work for the hardcore believers if they believe. Belief is irrational in many ways, and it's a matter of shaking up that belief and saying, wait a second, I agree with you, I understand where you're coming from, but can we have a dialogue? Tell me why. And it's not about aggravating somebody, it's more about a conversation in that sense. I don't know if that answers. As I said, I don't think I could.
Great, we have time for one more question.
Thank you. This isn't a question so much as I was gonna, I think this is something I think a lot about, and also just want to say thank you so much for your talk, because I do think about the education side of things, and it's just so interesting, I think, and helpful to think about the other side, which is, well, three prongs actually, as you say. So the information creation, but then the AI detection, I think is really useful for learners and people, you know, for readers reading information. But there are a couple of things I think about, especially in the US context. One is which we teach kids from a very young age to sort of choose their perspective first. And then to kind of cherry pick evidence to match their opinion. So it's going into things, I think we're coming at it from a perspective of, I'm going to be right, I'm not interested in hearing multiple perspectives or multiple kinds of evidence. And that's from kindergarten on. My kindergartner a couple years ago, he comes home with an essay of like, put your opinion up here and then cherry pick your evidence. Whereas in some other countries like Finland, they teach kids a deliberative essay of, look at all the evidence first carefully and then, then make an opinion. And the second thing I think is thinking about some of the research coming out of social psychology, getting readers to engage some of their existing beliefs and understanding where those beliefs are coming from and how those might interact with how they're reading information. And as you point out, the importance of listening across perspectives, kind of considering those multiple pieces of evidence and engaging kids in those really tough conversations across multiple divergent perspectives. Not that we are good at this yet, right? Like this research is in its infancy. So I think so far we haven't seen a ton of interventions that are super, super effective. It's a really complex process. And I'm really interested to learn from everybody in the next couple of days.
Thank you for your comment. It also is a matter of who teaches the teachers, right? And that's where I see the university and educational kind of programs being important and kind of acculturating the teachers themselves who are going to talk to those kids in schools from early age on.
Yeah, I think culture is so important, right?
Right. 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 I intentionally didn't go after every single possible intervention in education because I'm hoping to learn from you a little bit more and hear how successful it is. How are we doing?
Good? Yeah, okay. Well, just want to thank you, Victoria.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for coming in. Thanks for those of you joining us online for this. Just to let you know that this conversation will remain on our YouTube channel if you'd like to revisit or share it. Those of you in the Zoom, we're going to keep the Zoom open. We'll be stopping the live stream, of course. We're going to have a pretty short pause as we switch over to the next panel, and we've got lots of things happening. 5 minutes. Let's go 5 minutes. Yeah, I'll jump on for a little intro so you'll know it's starting, but